In the very heart of London, far beneath the footsteps of commuters rushing through the underground, lies one of the most secretive and powerful places on Earth. A place almost no one ever thinks about, despite passing just meters above it. Here, in the vaults of the Bank of England, rests the largest concentration of gold bars on the planet. More than 5,100 tons of pure gold. Roughly 400,000 bars, stacked into gleaming walls heavier than skyscrapers. To move all of it, you'd need dozens of military cargo planes. And the total value? Enough to build an entirely new city from scratch. But here's the paradox that almost no one talks about. Although London houses the greatest gold stockpile on Earth, only about 6% of it belongs to Britain itself. The rest, thousands of tons, belongs to other nations. Their wealth, their reserves, their future. All lying under London, under British laws, under British control. And the real question isn't how much gold is here. It's why the world trusts Britain to hold it. And what would happen if one day the rules suddenly changed? Because the true power of the United Kingdom was never in how much gold it owned, but in how it learned to control gold, its storage, its movement, its price, its global standards. This didn't happen overnight. It took centuries. Centuries of piracy, empire, financial innovation, and a transformation so subtle that most of the world still hasn't realized it. Britain may have lost its colonial empire, but it built a new one. An empire of vaults, trust, and rules, where the gold of nations rests under British soil, and where London dictates the value of the world's most important metal. How did this happen? How did a small island nation accumulate enough influence to become the guardian and gatekeeper of global gold? To understand this, we have to go back, far back, to the age of sails and shadows. When the British Crown first began filling its treasury, not through finance, but through cannons. To understand how Britain became the world's unofficial banker of gold, we need to return to an era when the ocean was the main battlefield, the 16th century. A time when England was not yet a global empire, but a struggling, poor kingdom on the edge of Europe. Meanwhile, Spain basked in limitless wealth. Its ships, massive lumbering galleons, crossed the Atlantic carrying unimaginable treasures from the New World. Silver from the mountains of Bolivia. Gold from Peru and Mexico. Jewels, spices, exotic goods. Spain's power rested not on armies alone, but on endless streams of precious metal flowing into its ports like rivers of fortune. England could only watch from afar, until it decided to change the rules of the game. Not by diplomacy, not by trade, but by something far more dangerous. Licensed piracy. The English crown invented a scheme that would rewrite global history. Privateering. It worked like this. The king or queen granted private entrepreneurs official permission to rob Spanish ships. The crown pretended to stay out of it. But in reality, it received a share of every stolen ounce of treasure, without risking a single royal ship. And at the heart of this shadowy enterprise was a man whispered about across the oceans. Francis Drake. El Draco. The Dragon. In 1577, Drake set out on a secret mission from Queen Elizabeth I herself. What happened next entered legend. Off the coast of Ecuador, he intercepted the Spanish galleon Cacafuego, bursting with treasure. The loot was so immense it was almost absurd, worth a fortune that could transform the English economy overnight. And it did. Drake didn't stop there. On the Panamanian Isthmus, he ambushed a Spanish caravan so heavily loaded with silver that his men physically couldn't carry it all. They buried 15 tons of treasure in the jungle because it was simply too heavy to move. 5 ships began that mission. Only one returned. But the gold and silver on board yielded returns of nearly 4,700% for investors. A number so unbelievable it sounds fictional, yet it happened. Spain's King Philip II was furious. He placed a massive bounty on Drake's head. But back in England, Drake was greeted as a hero. In 1581, Queen Elizabeth boarded his ship, the Golden Hind, and knighted him, right on the deck, surrounded by the plundered wealth of her rival. And she knew exactly what she was doing. That gold wasn't spent on palaces or feasts. It built ships, warships, a navy that, just a few years later, would crush the invincible Spanish Armada and shift the balance of power in Europe forever. Privateering became history's first state-sponsored venture capital. But instead of funding startups, England funded pirates. And those pirates brought back the gold that laid the foundation for something much larger, an empire. But piracy was just the beginning. The next chapter of Britain's gold story would unfold on land, under the banner of a corporation so powerful it had its own army, and it would drain the wealth of an entire subcontinent. If privateers were the sharp blade of England's early expansion, then the next engine of Britain's wealth was something far more systematic and far more ruthless. A corporation. The most powerful the world had ever seen. The East India Company. Founded in 1600 with modest capital, it soon evolved into a state within a state. With its own laws, its own fleet, its own currency, and, eventually, its own army. At its peak, the company commanded 260,000 soldiers, twice as many as Britain itself. But its real power was not military. It was economic. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the East India Company secured the right to collect taxes in Bengal, at the time India's richest province. What followed was a financial scheme so effective and so silent that it drained India's wealth into Britain for nearly 2 centuries. Here's how it worked. 1. First, the company collected taxes from millions of Indians. 2. Then it used that very same tax money to buy goods produced by Indians, textiles, spices, tea, and countless other valuable commodities. 3. Finally, those goods were shipped to Britain and sold at massive profit. A portion of that profit flowed directly to the British Crown and aristocracy, many of whom personally owned shares in the company. Indians were essentially forced to give away their labor and resources in exchange for their own money. A perfect loop of extraction. A machine designed to enrich one side while impoverishing the other. Historians estimate that over the centuries of British rule, wealth equivalent to $45 trillion in today's value was drained from India, 17 times the size of Britain's current economy. That wasn't a side effect of empire. It was the empire. The same monarchs who defended the Christian faith, who sponsored Bibles and churches, were also shareholders in a corporation built on systematic plunder, all feeding the same treasury, the same vaults, the same growing pool of gold. But the biggest transformation was still ahead. Because soon Britain would create a financial revolution that changed not just its own economy, but the entire world. A revolution that turned London into the global capital of gold, not through conquest but through rules. This revolution had a name. The gold standard. By the early 19th century, Britain had already accumulated immense wealth from oceans and colonies. But the next turning point didn't come from cannons or corporate armies. It came from an idea, one that would reshape global finance forever. In 1821, Britain became the first country in the world to adopt the gold standard. From that moment on, every British banknote could be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold. And the pound sterling, backed by the promise of pure metal, became the most trusted currency on earth. But there was a catch. To maintain this system, the Bank of England needed enormous reserves of gold. More than any nation had ever held. And then history delivered the perfect opportunity. First came the Australian gold rush of the 1850s. Entire ships loaded with freshly mined gold set sail for London. Not because they had to, but because London offered the highest liquidity, the strongest financial institutions, and the safest vaults. Then came South Africa. The discovery of the Witwatersrand gold fields in 1886, the richest ever found, transformed Britain's access to gold. British companies controlled most of the mines and with them the global gold supply. By the dawn of the 20th century, the British Empire controlled territories producing over 60% of the world's gold. And a significant portion of that metal ultimately ended up in London. 2 world wars only accelerated the process. Allied nations shipped their gold to Britain in exchange for weapons, food, and military support. After the wars, Britain seized German assets, took reparations, and continued adding to its reserves. By 1950, Britain reached its historical peak, 2,543 tons of gold, 8 times more than today. But something even more important happened. London became not just a holder of gold, but the center of global gold trading. Starting in 1919, the world's official gold price was determined through the London gold fixing at the Rothschild Bank. Deals were made here. Standards were set here. If your gold wasn't accepted in London, it might as well not exist on the world market. This wasn't just influence. It was control. Control over the world's most important metal. Control over the rules of trade. Control over the financial future of nations. But piles of gold required something else as well, a place strong enough to hold them. A fortress beneath the city. A vault unlike anything the world had ever seen. And Britain built exactly that. When Britain realized just how much gold was flowing into the kingdom, it needed more than a vault. It needed a fortress. So, in the 1930s, construction began on one of the most secure underground complexes in the world, the modern gold vaults of the Bank of England. They were built 15 meters below ground, deep enough to survive anything, even a direct bomb hit. Europe was preparing for war and Britain understood. Whatever happened on the surface, the gold must remain safe. Picture this. 9 enormous halls. 2 underground levels. A total area equal to 4 football fields filled with shimmering metal. Gold bars stacked on pallets, exactly 80 bars per pallet, precisely 1 metric ton. Walls of gold rising as high as a 2-story house. Massive steel doors weighing several tons themselves. Locks opened only with enormous keys, each nearly a meter long. Even the London Underground had to adjust its tracks to avoid disturbing the vaults. To this day, employees standing among the stacks of gold can hear trains rumbling somewhere above, unaware that beneath their route lies the wealth of nations. And here's the strangest part. The gold almost never moves. It doesn't need to. London became the world's most liquid gold market because ownership could be transferred with nothing more than a keystroke. A bar could change hands dozens of times a day without budging a millimeter. Every morning at 10:30 and every afternoon at 3 o'clock, a ritual takes place that sets the value of gold worldwide, the LBMA gold price. From Dubai jewelers to Asian central banks, from African mining companies to New York traders, everyone watches the number announced in London. And London doesn't just set the price. It defines what real gold even is. The London Good Delivery Standard dictates the size, purity, weight and stamping of gold bars used in global trade. If your gold doesn't meet this standard, selling it internationally becomes nearly impossible. In other words, London doesn't merely store gold. London governs gold. But the greatest irony is still ahead. Because beneath all the layers of history, all the glory of empire, all the walls of gold, lies one astonishing truth. Almost none of this gold belongs to Britain. And that is where the kingdom's greatest secret begins. Now comes the most paradoxical part of this entire story, the twist that even many economists overlook. The Bank of England's vaults hold over 5,100 tons of gold. But Britain itself owns only 310 tons. Just 6%. The rest belongs to foreign nations, Europe, Asia, the Americas. Central banks that, for decades, have chosen London as the keeper of their national treasures. But why? Why trust a former empire known for its strategic ambitions? The answer is simple. History, liquidity, and control. In over 3 centuries of storage, London hasn't recorded a single theft. Every day, gold worth around $70 billion is traded here, instantly, safely, invisibly. And most importantly, gold kept in London is the easiest to sell. Change of ownership takes seconds. No forklifts, no tunnels, just a digital entry. The system works beautifully, as long as the world follows the rules. But here's the secret no one says aloud. If a global catastrophe or major war were to erupt, Britain physically controls all the gold stored in its vaults. And history already knows examples of what that could mean. In 1940, after France collapsed, Britain froze French gold reserves. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, it blocked Egyptian assets. Gold belonging to the Russian Tsarist government, stored in British banks, was never returned to the Soviet Union. In 2020, the Bank of England refused to hand over Venezuela's gold, arguing that it didn't recognize the government requesting it. The message is subtle but clear. When the rules break, gold stays where it lies. And where does it lie? Under London. Behind tons of steel and concrete. Under the watch of British intelligence. Inside vaults that belong to the Bank of England, not the nations that shipped their gold there. Britain may not own the world's gold, but it owns the world's trust. And in the modern era, that trust is worth far more. The British Empire of land is long gone. But the empire of rules, standards, and financial power lives on, in the silent halls beneath London. Because in the end, contracts are written in ink. But gold remains where it lies.